He lost the House of Representatives to the Democrats in Tuesday's midterm elections. And on Wednesday, he fired his attorney general and stripped a White House reporter of his press pass. Is the Trump presidency entering a new and dangerous phase? In this upfront special, I'll ask one of the US president's advisors. Stephen Rogers, thanks for joining me on Upfront. President Trump said that these midterm elections would be, quote, a referendum on him. Given the Democrats won back control of the House of Representatives after 8 years, and they won the House popular vote by 7 percentage points, nationwide, the American people seem to have rejected him.
Well, I have to dispute that because the president's party won key gubernatorial races in battleground states that are going to be very, very important. We're talking about Florida, Iowa, Ohio, very important in the 2020 election. That's number one. Number two, when President Obama was in office, he lost 63 seats in a midterm, Clinton 40-something seats, President Trump only about 23. So the trend was always the president in power would lose seats. But the key here, and we can't miss this point, was the United States Senate. That is what the Republican Party focused on, because therein lies your control of bringing nominees in for the U.S. Supreme Court, yes, federal district courts, etc.
Yeah, he definitely held on to the Senate. What's interesting, though, is he campaigned for Senate candidates in Wisconsin, Montana, Ohio, Pennsylvania, all states he won in 2016, and yet those candidates lost in every single one of those states in Senate races. You mentioned governor's races. Well, Kansas, his close ally Chris Kobach, a state he won by 20 points, Stephen Rogers. He lost on Tuesday. He lost Kansas.
Well, you learn something in politics, and, you know, it's very difficult to transfer the popularity and the voting public from one candidate to another. So I would reject the fact that this was a repudiation of the president of the United States.
He made a referendum about himself, Stephen Rogers. I didn't. Let me ask you this. His response to these midterms was to fire his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, on Wednesday. An Attorney General he's been publicly attacking for months now because Sessions didn't stop a special counsel investigation into the Trump campaign's alleged ties with Russia. Isn't firing the Attorney General of the United States for nakedly political reasons at best an abuse of power, at worst obstruction of justice?
Look, I've been in law enforcement my whole life. The Attorney General, Sessions, he didn't do his job very well. He was not aggressive. He didn't go after the DNC. He didn't go after Hillary Clinton with all that we know about her. And by the way, he should have. That means Sessions should have been upfront with the president about his conversations or his involvement somehow with Russia, which caused him to recluse himself. He wasn't honest with the president. So the president was patient, and that was the time to take the action he did.
It's funny that in defending the sacking, you're basically admitting it was political. You're saying he didn't go after the president's opponents. He didn't go after the Democrats, which is not the job of an attorney general to just go after the president's opponents. If Barack Obama's election campaign was being investigated by the Justice Department for its ties to a foreign government, and Obama had then fired the attorney general the day after he lost crucial midterms, your party would have gone nuts, wouldn't it? How can you not see the hypocrisy here, Stephen Rogers?
He did. This wasn't a political move. The Attorney General
you just admitted it was. You said he didn't go after the Democrats. That's the definition of a political move.
Well, who was involved? Think about this. Who was involved in that whole fiasco with the emails with Clinton? The Democrats, for goodness sake. Now, if it was the Republicans, I would be telling you the same thing. The Attorney General did not do his job, and that's why he is no longer Attorney General.
This is a president who is also accused of running a, quote, racist, nativist, fear-mongering midterm election campaign. He ran a campaign video combining footage of an undocumented criminal who killed 2 cops with footage of Central American migrants tearing down a fence, rushing across a border, as if they're all cop killers who the Democrats want to let into the country. An ad so inflammatory, so racist, that even loyal Fox News decided to pull it from the airwaves.
Absolute nonsense declaring that as racist. Everything, look, a picture says 1,000 words, okay? You can't change what's going on there. Now, you said I worked with military intelligence and law enforcement. You would be surprised what's coming across that border. You've got children that are not with their parents. You've got drug traffickers. You've got people perhaps bringing weapons across the border. They're trying to divert the fact that the president is trying to protect this country. And the fact that they complain about his term invasion, it is an invasion. All right? It isn't an invasion of an army as we would normally look at it.
It's not an invasion. People asking for asylum is not an invasion by any definition of the word invasion, and you were in the Navy, you should know that.
Well, I do know that, and I've got to tell you, it's an invasion of people who should not be coming here other than come here legally.
They are 700 miles away. Even if they were invading, they're not very close to doing it anytime soon. You know very well the entire caravan thing was a hoax, to use Donald Trump's very word. He hasn't mentioned it since the election. Fox News, a channel you regularly appear on, has stopped talking about the caravan. Funny that, the caravan just disappeared from the headlines the morning after the midterms. How convenient.
I'll tell you how it disappeared from the headlines. And by the way, they could have gotten asylum in Mexico and they turned it down. It disappeared from the headlines because the mainstream media is making it disappear. We find out that they're more interested in what? Just
Fox News is not running anything about the caravan. That's a channel you appear on. Stop blaming the mainstream media.
Well, who controls
Fox News? You tell me, a supporter of Trump called Rupert Murdoch. You tell me who controls the media. Do you want to tell us about who you think controls the media?
Yeah, the mainstream media. All right, the mainstream media is controlled by a lot of liberals, and they are
Fox
directing
News controlled by liberals. But let me ask you this question. Fox refused to run this ad. You say it's not a racist ad. Fox refused to run it. The networks pulled it down. Do you know who praised the caravan ad and called it a masterpiece?
Look, Fox News, for whatever reason why their editorial board pulled it, I don't know.
Okay,
but I can tell you
do you know who praised the ad as a masterpiece?
No.
David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, called the ad a masterpiece. I wonder what appealed to him about that non-racist ad.
David Duke is a racist. He has no place and no word in the administration of the president.
We agree he's a racist. So why does he like your ad so much?
Well, look there are people that will praise things that, complete for their own political agenda. We can't control what people think and what they say, but you don't hear the President of the United States making racist remarks as some people are trying to lead others to believe.
His own former lawyer, Michael Cohen, who worked for Trump for more than a decade, has said that Trump told him, black people are too stupid to vote for me. That's not a racist remark in your view.
Did Donald Trump, did you hear Donald Trump say that?
No, Michael Cohen heard him say it.
So we're going to believe a guy that wants to cooperate with law enforcement to get himself out of a jam that he put himself in. Hey, I've had people work for me for many years, and they turned out to be creeps.
Okay, and you don't think going on about George Soros' role in the caravan that he had no role in at a time when George Soros is being targeted by racists who support Donald Trump, that's not racist or anti-Semitic in any way?
At the end of the day, when we measure what a person is doing, we have to not listen so much to the media hype and just listen to the words coming out of their mouth.
I think we're all listening to the president. Just one last question on the video. It's not just racist in the eyes of many people. It was completely false. It was a lie. The guy in that ad, the cop killer, was last allowed back into the country not under Democrats, but under George W. Bush. You know that, don't you?
Yes, that's a fact. That's a fact. I will not argue that point.
The ad was a lie to say the Democrats let him back in.
It wasn't because it was under Bush and it was under Obama.
But that's not what the ad said.
Clinton.
But that's not what the ad said, Stephen, as you know. The ad said Democrats let him back in to kill 2 cops. That's not true. That's false.
Doesn't make it a lie. Doesn't make it a lie. Did he kill cops? Yes. Did he laugh and... Did he say he wanted to kill more cops? Yes.
No. Did Democrats let him back in to kill those cops? No. George W. Bush let him back in. You agree with me on that, surely. That's the facts.
But under the Obama administration, because of very liberal rules and regulations regarding immigration, this guy was allowed to run free. So you know what? I'll agree with you. Let's agree on this.
You agree with me that campaign video was false to say the Democrats let him back into the country when it was Bush?
No, not at all. Not at all.
I'm confused.
Not at all.
No, let's take a pause. I'm confused. What do you mean not at all? He was let in under George W. Bush, not under the Democrats the last time he came in. So your video was false. Donald Trump's video that you're defending was false.
But he was allowed to run free under
Fair enough.
Obama
That's a different argument. That's not what I'm asking. The video said the Democrats let him in. They didn't say they let him run free. They said they let him in. It was George W. Bush who let him in last, after which he killed 2 cops. Why didn't the video say that?
I'm not going to argue that point with you.
Good.
I am
we both agree that was
both
false.
Parties are responsible.
That's a different argument. I'm asking about the falsity of it. And just on this idea of kind of safety and security, you're a former naval man. You talk about migrants invading the U.S. Presumably, but you think Donald Trump wants to protect the U.S. The attacks that we've seen in recent weeks in the U.S., an attempted pipe bomb attack on 12 people that Donald Trump targeted, a massacre in a synagogue by a far-right shooter. These attacks were not carried out by anyone who came in on a caravan, were they? They were all homegrown, white nationalist, American-born terrorists.
Absolutely, okay, but you're not hearing about, and in some instances you're hearing about the child traffickers, the children who are here to be sold to others, the drug proliferation, the cartel people.
I'm not disputing that. I'm just wondering why
ammunition.
Donald Trump sends troops to a border for a caravan 700 miles away for security purposes. Meanwhile, in the US, domestic terrorists are killing Jews in synagogues. We don't hear so much outrage or protection measures from the president or from your party on that.
I'll answer that question. It's the same answer that we try to find regarding Chicago with the toughest gun laws in the country. Liberal, Democrat, socialist policies are destroying this country. There's no more rule of law because of what they've done.
You know the Liberal Democrats are not in charge of anything.
Social.
I mean, they are now in charge of the House, but for the past 2 years, Trump has controlled every branch of government. In those 2 years, anti-Semitic attacks have gone up, homophobic attacks have gone up, anti-Muslim attacks have gone up, and the number of white nationalist groups has gone up, as you know, as a former intelligence man. Is that all a coincidence that this all happened on Donald Trump's watch? Complete coincidence, Stephen Rogers?
And
really?
the number of police officers have been shot that have gone up. See, you can't blame President Trump for all of the ills that are going on. These are Democrat socialist policies that are catching up with us.
I have no idea what socialist policies have led to an increase in neo-Nazi groups over the last 2 years.
I'll tell you what the social...
Was it a socialist who sent pipe bombs in the mail? It was a Trump supporter. It was a loyal, devout Trump supporter who went to the rallies, wore a hat, and he sent pipe bombs to 12 people who Trump targeted by name.
These are nuts. These are crazy people.
Nuts who support your president.
Listen. We can't stop people from supporting the things we do. We can't stop people who look at our TV stations. A lot of nuts watch us, okay?
You can stop saying violent, hate-filled things that are inciting these people. If Trump stopped saying globalists, stopped blaming George Soros for caravans, stopped talking about how he likes to reporters who are beaten up, and stops calling about enemies of the people, maybe some people wouldn't take those words and turn to violence.
Well, maybe if Maxine Waters, Eric Holder, and the rest of the Democrat crew would stop doing the same thing.
Really?
Okay?
Can you point to me a terrorist attack carried out by a supporter of Maxine Waters, please?
Well, you know what? The terrorist attack, all right, could be small or big. I think going into a restaurant and you have your wife and kids there and a gang of people go there.
And that's the equivalent of 11 Jewish worshippers being gunned down? Seriously?
I think, no.
So then why raise it?
I'm not saying it's equivalent.
It sounds like
I'm raising it because you're saying that what political people are saying
that Maxine Waters has never inspired in any way a terrorist attack. I'm asking you to clarify for me, and all you've got is restaurants.
They've inspired violence. What happened recently with Tucker Carlson's home? Antifa went to his home and terrorized. You want to use the word terror? Terrorized his wife and kids.
And is that the equivalent of pipe bombs being sent in the mail to the former presidents?
Of course not.
So then stop raising it if it's not the same thing. Let me ask you this. Let's circle back as we finish this interview back to the midterms. Are we going to see a changed Donald Trump post these midterms, post these losses in the House, post these governor losses? Or is it impossible for a man like Donald Trump to change, given changing political circumstances?
Well, I think he already indicated, and he has been consistent about this, reaching across the aisle. Will he change? He will not change with regard to his determination to keep America first. But saying that, even Nancy Pelosi had some olive branches thrown across the aisle to the Republicans and to the president. So maybe, just maybe, and maybe we could at least hope for this, that they'll all come together and do what's right for the country. The Democrats want to be successful. The president is a strong-willed individual. He's been successful so far. Hopefully everybody's going to come together and do what's right for the country under his leadership.
Stephen Rogers, on that note, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks for joining me on UpFront.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.
On Tuesday, American voters delivered a check on President Donald Trump's power, with the opposition Democrats retaking control of the House of Representatives for the first time in 8 years. But the Senate remained in the hands of the Republicans, who increased their majority. So what can Democrats actually now do to rein in this president who just fired his attorney general? Joining me to discuss this all are Sabrina Siddiqui, political reporter for The Guardian US, based in Washington, D.C., Van Newkirk, staff writer for The Atlantic, covering American politics and policy, and from Florida, Rick Wilson, Republican political strategist, Trump critic, and author of the book Everything Trump Touches Dies. Thank you all for joining me on UpFront. Sabrina, let's start with you. He fired the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, straight after these midterm results came in. Is the United States in the middle of a constitutional crisis, on the verge of a constitutional crisis? Where are we on the crisis spectrum?
Well, the president left little doubt that the reason he fired Jeff Sessions was because of his frustration with the Russia probe. He said that Jeff Sessions, the decision he made to recuse himself because Sessions had not disclosed his own contacts with the Russians during the 2016 campaign, Trump said that was his primary source of ire. He obviously wants more control over the direction of this investigation. I think it's the first step that he's laid out in the path toward potentially firing the special counsel. That, of course, is what I think would trigger then the true constitutional crisis. And I don't think anyone is holding their breath about the prospect of Republicans taking any action to rein this president in.
Van Newkirk, you wrote a big piece for The Atlantic about how Jeff Sessions was cracking down on civil rights, eroding civil rights in this country, which is what Trump basically wanted him to do. And it's this Russia issue that he had with Jeff Sessions. A lot of people on the left are happy to see Jeff Sessions gone, but they're not happy the way he's been got rid of, for the reasons he's got rid of. Is that fair to say?
I think it's fair to say. A lot of them seem to be tempering that optimism because it all depends who will be named as Jeff Sessions' real successor. It's very possible that we could have an even more Trumpist type who goes into that office, who is a loyalist, who is going to crack down more at the border, and who is going to advocate more sort of open police brutality, as Sessions and Trump have done.
Rick Wilson, you made a name for yourself being a critic of your own party in this age of Trump. The Democrats now control the House of Representatives. Do you have faith in your former opponents, the Democrats? Do you have faith that Nancy Pelosi, the new Speaker-elect, that this party is right for this moment, is able to hold Trump to account in the way that you clearly want him to be held to account?
Well, I think we have to hope that they're competent in engaging in serious and probing efforts to hold Trump to account across a whole spectrum of issues. Not only the Russia probe, but the corruption that's endemic throughout this administration. And look, I would have preferred, as a conservative, I'd prefer a conservative majority that did their job. But the conservative majority declined to do their job. They declined to act like a co-equal branch of government for 2.5 years, and instead they acted as if they worked for Donald Trump. And so they face the electoral consequences of that, because right now the Republicans are complicit in Donald Trump's behavior and his lawbreaking.
And Van, explain to our global audience watching this show how much of an obstacle the Democrats faced in terms of the voting system, in terms of the voter laws. We saw long lines at some polling stations in places like Georgia. How hard was it for the Democrats to win this, just to win this majority in the House, given the way that the election system is set up in this country?
Well, I think explaining all the difficulties in our election system, we may not have enough time to do that. But if you look at from beginning to end, say what it takes for a voter in Georgia to get to the polls. You have to register, which is not a universal thing across different countries. You have to have voter ID. It has to be strict photo voter ID. In Georgia, they had lots of difficulties with people who were voting absentee, who were mail-in ballots. There were polling places that have shifted. And under Secretary of State Brian Kemp, Georgia's closed something on the order of 10% of all their polling locations in the last 5 years. So lots of people in really rural states have to travel longer now to go vote. And that's all before we get to the long lines, before we get to now there are thousands of provisional ballots that have just been placed in a box. There are people who are saying...
The person who was running for governor in Georgia was running the election.
We have multiple states now where secretaries of state who are administering their elections are also running for governor. Just very interesting.
Would you call U.S. elections free and fair?
No. And I don't think the Justice Department would consider them free and fair.
Sabrina, the question I have is, are the Democrats up to this moment? Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker-elect, is now taking charge again of the House. She said on election night, we're going to react with bipartisanship. It's going to be a bipartisan marketplace of ideas. A lot of Democrats are thinking, hold on, these elections don't look so free and fair. You've now fired the Attorney General. There could be a constitutional crisis. Is this really the moment to be trying to do business as usual, trying to go back to the good old days of bipartisanship, when some would argue the American Republic, the American democracy is at stake?
Well, that pledge of bipartisanship will fall apart the moment that the president tweets something outrageous, and then it takes Democrats on a different track. He's constantly talked up a big game about pursuing a bipartisan infrastructure deal. We haven't seen a serious proposal from the White House in nearly 2 years now. I think the challenge for Democrats is really going to be staying on message and not going after every shiny object. Because as we know, this is a president who...
Staying on message, what is the message?
Well, I think that one is going to be restoring a check and balance through the investigative powers that Congress has, which gives it the authority to subpoena documents and witnesses. The White House is preparing for an onslaught of investigations. It's not just about the firing of James Comey, potentially Jeff Sessions, and Trump's attempts to interfere with the Mueller probe. It's also looking into his business dealings in Moscow, potentially subpoenaing his tax returns, which the public has not seen, misuse of taxpayer dollars by several cabinet officials in this administration, looking at some of the ethics violations potentially in the White House, the way that the Trump organization has potentially profited off the office that the family now holds. If anything, what that does is it reinforces many of the avenues that Republicans did not pursue because they did not want to pick a fight with the president. That may now well change.
Rick, is there anything that came out of these midterms this week that you think will give Republicans pause, make them think, you know what, maybe we shouldn't hitch ourselves to the Trump wagon as closely as we have, or not?
Well, a lot of the folks that had a pause already, 44 retirements, and now well on to 35 defeats, those folks have all learned that no matter where you fall on the spectrum, Donald Trump is political poison unless you are in the deepest of red areas. We don't have many swing seat Republicans left anymore. Will Hurd in Texas is one of the only ones who survived. Almost everybody else who either opposed Trump, that he was insulting from the podium, like Mia Love or Carlos Curbelo, or who strongly favored Trump, like Chris Kobach, they got their tails handed to them. And the fact of the matter is, once you become somebody who's not defined by principles or policies or politics of the Republican Party or the conservative movement, you become defined by what comes out of Donald Trump's Twitter feed that day. You become contingent upon Donald Trump's rise and fall, given every mood and every impulse he has. And so a lot of people learn that lesson in the party, and they don't understand why the power he has over the base, as shrunken as it is, has remained so strong no matter what happens. They can't understand that they're in a cult now, not in a party.
Indeed. And Sabrina, you mentioned the Democrats shouldn't chase after shiny objects. People who have chased after shiny objects are reporters, I think it's fair to say. How much has Donald Trump been able to play the media, and how much is that going to change before the next election in 2020?
The challenge is that the media has this argument that he's the president of the United States, and so his words matter. Now, there's no question that that's true, but you look at the way in which we've been talking now about his war with the media a day after he fired the attorney general, which was a day after his party suffered significant losses in the midterms. It was a distraction from the midterms. So I think what the media is going to have to continue to try and refocus on some of the themes that have prevailed during the course of the Trump administration. One of them is, of course, this question of the Russia probe and the potential obstruction of justice at the White House. But the other comes back down to this idea of the breakdown of norms and the threat that he has posed to the democratic process and to the institutions that are so vital to this country. And I think that oftentimes we do get back to that conversation, but I wouldn't hold I wouldn't hold my hopes in the media not still getting distracted by the tweets. I think that's going to be a challenge. And so Democrats are going to have to kind of work within that construct and try and rise above that conversation. And
it's even worse than a distraction, Van. From my perspective, tell me if I'm being unfair, quote unquote, the liberal media in the US doesn't know how to cover a president who basically is openly authoritarian, openly nationalist, openly violating the norms that Sabrina mentioned. The media almost wants to go back to business as usual. If only Trump would behave a little bit normal, they would play along. And they just don't quite know how to cope with this guy.
Yeah, well, it seems to me that so much of liberal media, mainstream media, whatever you want to call it, has been used to covering politics as if it were already reality TV, as if it were a grand game. They cover the palace intrigue, and they frame everything as sort of a debate between equals, and to consider everything that's said, if not in good faith, to be actually advanced in the purpose of winning the game, right? You have somebody like Trump who his very sort of existence is predicated upon being in front of reality TV cameras, towards rigging that game towards what he wants to do. And he knows that he can go and say something that's totally false and not be called on it.
Rick, last question to you. I know you're a regular on cable news, so sorry to put you in this difficult position, but Jeff Zucker, head of CNN, said recently, when we stop covering Trump, our ratings go down. Surely that's Trump's greatest weapon going into the 2020 re-election campaign.
Look, Trump is the center of America's political dialogue, and you can't look away from it. Now, I think the point is correct that the networks have a lot of trouble confronting it. They don't know how to cover a reality TV star. They don't know how to cover someone who really is an amoral liar most of the time. He has no sense of shame, and the degree to which he's willing to deceive the American people is unprecedented. You know, it makes Nixon look like a piker. And so we end up with this situation where the networks, they can't look away. There's always a train wreck. And it is legitimately newsworthy to watch a president drag the American people, toward a situation where they're not looking at this as Republicans or Democrats, but they're looking at it as people who are worshiping an authoritarian wannabe on one hand and people who are fighting against it on the other. We live in a remarkable moment in our history, and it has to be covered.
Rick, Sabrina, Van, thank you all for joining me on UpFront. That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.